Thank you, and welcome to this event at the Swedish Pavilion at COP26. I'm Emily Olander, and I'm the Climate Action Program Manager at Ericsson, and I welcome you here today. Today we're going to talk about accelerating climate action through science and innovation, and think about where we would be without these things. We have an exciting program for you today. We will start off with the Ericsson CEO, Börje Ekholm, going through to International Chamber of Commerce, Andrew Wilson, who is the Global Policy Director. And then we will follow by host companies of this session, a panel discussion with AFRY, ABB, Alfa Laval, and Ericsson. To set the scene, I would like to welcome my own CEO of Ericsson, Börje Ekholm, to the scene. And we have him through Zoom. Welcome, Börje. How are you feeling today?
Thanks, Emily. It's great to be with you.
Oh, super.
I'm
I don't hear you.
Sorry, I have to be virtual, but...
I hear you well. Thank you. Sorry.
You hear me?
Yes, I hear you well. Thank you so much. So you will help me today set the scenes, talk about science and innovation, and please go ahead. We are all eager to hear you.
Thanks, Emily. Well, climate change is undoubtedly the biggest threat facing our civilization and our planet. And by creating connections that make the unimaginable possible, we at Ericsson are helping to shape an exciting and positive future. A world where limitless connectivity improves lives, redefines businesses, and pioneers a sustainable future. But we're in a hurry to take actions. The IPCC report just released clearly confirms the need for urgent actions in order to shape our future. And we at Ericsson, we are committing to shaping the future. We have a solid foundation for our commitment. We have been a sustainability pioneer for more than 2 decades. And we're committed to supporting the Paris Agreement. And we are one of the first companies, or part of that first wave of companies, who set targets that were approved by Science-Based Target Initiative. I think today it's very easy for companies to make claims, especially claims that are made far out in the future. I find this to be a big issue personally. And the reason for that, if we as a company or I as a CEO make a commitment that's far out in the future, it's actually somebody else's problem. And I don't think that's good enough. Instead, I think we need to set long-term ambitions, but we need to create clear, measurable targets that are short-term in nature, so we can track the progress we're making, as well as to show to society and to different stakeholders that we are serious about taking the actions for creating a better long-term future. We think here basing such work truly on science is critical. And I would say it's actually a fundamental part of the gene pool at Ericsson, is to base our decisions on facts and science. And we do that for everything, and we do that for sustainability, of course, as well. We carry out quite a lot of research, both within our core business, of course, but also important to note on wide-ranging or projects for general industry. And decades of this research have proven to us and shown to us, and this is mostly peer-reviewed or always peer-reviewed when we publish, and that we have seen that wireless and digital technologies are a key part of solving the future or solving the climate crisis. And we see here that we can actually, as an ICT industry, impact 15% of the total greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And this is actually a third of halving the greenhouse gases by 2030. So it's clearly a substantial part, and that represents more than the EU and US combined emissions today. So we believe that technology is part of the solutions for the climate crisis. And more importantly, digital technologies is critical. And we see therefore that 5G is actually a platform for hyper-innovation, that's going to help us address the greenhouse gases going forward. Let me give you a couple of examples. In Italy, in the port of Livorno, we have been piloting 5G to transform the processes in the port. One part of this work is addressing the yard movements of goods, where 5G has helped to optimize the flow and optimize the operations. And as a result, we've been able to reduce the CO2 emissions by 24%. Another example is our own factory in Texas, in the US, where we have a 5G smart factory. And it has been designated the lighthouse by the World Economic Forum as one of 3 factories globally, actually. This factory is powered 100% by renewable energy, and we have designed it leveraging all new technologies available, for example, digital twins, energy and environmental monitoring, smart irrigation, etc. What we see here is that we can reduce the energy by 24% as well. And not only that, we're reducing wastewater and we have a very high productivity. But I would say even more important than that is actually that we are manufacturing close to customers, which means that we're shortening the logistics chains and emitting far less CO2 in the total, so to say, landed product at our customers. We see actually this as a bit of a role model on how we can change the manufacturing footprint going forward, building smaller factories closer to customers and thereby having a much less energy consumption in the total chain. We're also seeing, we have done research that we can see that 5G enabled communication can have touched many industry sectors. For example, the high emitting sectors like power, transport, manufacturing and buildings. And there it can actually reduce CO2 emissions by 20% by 2030. So it's a sizable part of the reduction targets can actually be done with current technologies. But what's important to remember about 5G is that it's more than just a network. It's actually a platform for hyper innovation. So it's capable of exponential positive impact on society, customers, and industries. And most importantly, it's in a secure way, because 5G is designed for security from the outset, from bottom up. So what we see is that with 5G, we're going to move technology boundaries forward in a way that we have never seen before. And might well prove to be the biggest platform for innovation the mankind have ever seen. We're going to see new consumer applications, we're going to see enterprise services, and many new use cases to digitalize industries, and it's going to create multiple business opportunities across all sectors. Our experiences tells us that digitalization is actually one of the key ways in order to address the CO2 reduction targets. And 5G opens many new opportunities, and it's really allowing us to reach the goal of halving the emission even faster than 2030. And I really challenge all governments, all companies around to actually leverage these capabilities in the best possible way, because that is an important step in addressing the biggest challenge we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Börje. And I think it's so many who doesn't understand the importance of the digital infrastructure. And I know that you yesterday had a really important fireside chat with Johan Rockström during our Exponential Climate Action Summit. And when we have the audience here, what was the main takeaway from your chat with him? As we're now discussing innovation and science today.
Yeah, I think for me the main takeaway is quite a lot of the technologies to halve emission by 2030 is actually already available. It's all about using them more. So for example, I'm participating on a video, right? That we are going to see these hybrid type of conferences even more going forward. And I'm convinced that leveraging already existing technologies are important. So that's one key takeaway. And the other key takeaway is we're in a hurry. It's not that even if we have a mission by 2030, it's not a safe place. What that means is we have a 50-50 chance of actually containing the climate crisis with that. So I think we need to really leverage new technologies in addition to making the behavioral changes. But new technology is going to be critical here, and it's already available.
Thank you so much, Börje. I will release you, and thank you so much again for coming in. And we're going to go to the next segment, where we will have Andrew Wilson, who is the Global Policy Director at International Chamber of Commerce, and he will also be joining digitally, so let's see if we can manage to get him up on the screen as well. Perfect. And I know you're on your way to the COP as well, so that's why you're stranded here. Can you hear me, Andrew?
I can hear you perfectly, loud and clear.
Perfect.
Sorry for the unconventional background, but I am on my way up to Glasgow, very aptly in a Swedish hybrid car, so at least I'm on message there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. And you have some messages for us. I will give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. We really wanted to take this opportunity to speak about the role of trade, or the potential role of trade, in supporting climate action. And let me just preface what I'm about to say by saying we're an organization founded 102 years ago that firmly believes that trade is a force for good in the world. So nothing that I'm about to say is criticizing trade, which obviously is a very powerful vector of social, economic, and environmental progress, but rather to think through what can be done to make trade an even more powerful force for good in the world. And one thing that has struck us in recent months in the run-up to COP26, most recently in a workshop we convened at the request of the new WTO Director General, specifically looking at the nexus between trade and climate change, is the tendency for many people to introduce this issue as if it's something novel, a frontier issue that no one really has looked at previously. And in that particular meeting that we had recently with the WTO, my mind went back to my distant days at university, almost 20 years ago, when one of the key reading items on an economics and politics course was a book from 1994 by Daniel Etzi of Yale called Greening the GATT, so the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the precursor to the WTO, so you can see the age of this. That starts with the following line: there is a growing consensus that new international rules and principles are needed to reconcile conflicts and promote complementarities between trade and environmental goals. So that's 1994. So this is not a new agenda by any means. And I think the challenge we have when it comes to looking at trade and climate is the need to take the debate out of the theoretical space and make it more practical. So I just want to set up three key challenges, which I hope are useful for the rest of the discussion today. The first is definitional challenge. So actually, what do we mean when we talk about sustainable trade or climate-friendly trade? That notion is clearly contested, and we're currently doing a project together with 250 banks and corporates to look at exactly this issue. And what we've seen is that there is no common understanding of what climate-friendly or sustainable trade means. So one thing we're going to be launching on Wednesday of this week at COP26, one of the primary reasons I'm driving up through England today, is a new framework, or at least a beta framework for consultation, to set out, first of all, a definition, among a standard definition for industry about what sustainable trade is. How do you actually define that? And then associated with that, a framework to allow companies and banks to grade or score the sustainability profile of individual trade transactions. It's remarkably difficult to do when you think through the complexities of international trade. And many people have said to us, as we've been through this process in the last couple of months, why don't you just use the sustainable bond frameworks that are widely available? And the reality is trade is far more complex. You have to think of the buyer, the seller, and their profiles, the nature of the goods, the intent of the transaction, the mode of transportation, and many other potential factors. And you have to think about how do you actually bring all those factors together in a way that can be used in the real world, including by small and medium-sized enterprises for whom trade is often a vital lifeline. So we're publishing that on Wednesday, and we'd very, very much welcome comments from the business community, from civil society, academia, multilateral institutions, so we can further iterate the framework and try and actually land this core problem of how do you define it, how do you measure what sustainability in trade really means. The second issue I just want to flag, again, it's an issue close to our heart, is the issue of small businesses. And I think this is the real practical issue. How do you enable small businesses in global supply chains to become more sustainable, more climate friendly, and ultimately achieve net zero emissions? As the Ericsson CEO said, we think technology has an absolutely vital role to play in this area. We also recognize that industry collaboration through and across supply chains is absolutely vital. But the other thing that we think governments are often missing is the key often to unlock SME action is access to finance and access to capital expenditure in particular, particularly if you think of the need to retrofit buildings, machinery. These are potentially big investments for companies with weak balance sheets. So we think governments really need to step up and think much more critically about how do you mobilize finance to allow SMEs to invest in a net zero future. Final point I just want to raise, I'll be very, very quick, is the legal issue when it comes to actually better synergizing trade and climate action. And one thing we've noticed in recent months from a series of projects we've been doing in consultation with industry is that international trade rules, so WTO trade rules, are often inconsistent, or at least to an extent hinder climate action or sustainability action by companies. And later this month at the World Trade Organization's ministerial conference, which is back end of November, right after COP, we'll be launching a new report which will look at how multilateral rules often hinder the deployment of circular approaches by corporates and actually how they could be refined and enhanced to speed action. So a very good example of where trade and climate action can be made more harmonious. Finally, just one thing I want to say is businesses are doing a lot. We're committed to working with businesses to maximize the contribution of trade and innovation to climate action. We also need governments to step up. And I talked earlier about the book from 1994 by Daniel Etzi of Yale. One of his key recommendations was the need for an agreement to enable tariff-free trade in environmental goods and services. Those discussions are still gridlocked at the WTO, and we think it's high time that governments come back to those negotiations. Don't let minor disagreements about bicycles made of steel or anything else scupper them, and come to something that can really start to speed the dissemination of the technologies and the goods and the services that are needed to achieve net zero by 2050 and halve emissions by the end of this decade. I'll leave it there, back to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I think what you mentioned there, it's so complex with trade. And I actually were in a panel discussion last week with ICC that you held with talking about how you can include trade more into the national determined contributions that the countries now have provided for the Paris Agreement and following up now for COP26. And it was extremely complex to really, understand because, we had businesses there, we work with SMEs and how we set climate targets is a bit more practical. And for me, my daily work as a climate action manager, I don't think about trade in that sense, I think more about, how you reduce emissions. And I think getting that discussion in, and it's the same we see with digitalization, it's also missing in the NDCs. I don't know if enough, if you feel like, how can we accelerate that work to get in what we need to in the country's plan so we actually can enhance both trade to help with, climate solutions for countries as well, but still developing, for example, digital infrastructure.
It's a great point, and you're definitely right to point to the complexity of some of those discussions at the WTO a couple of weeks ago. We think the answer is relatively simple, and we actually think the WTO can do more to act as a catalyst in this space. I think one of the core challenges that we face in the climate space, but I think more broadly when it comes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is trade policy making, environmental policy making, social policy making for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years have walked separate paths. And it's actually time, if we're serious about achieving the SDGs and delivering on the Paris Agreement, that we bring those different strands of policy making together nationally, regionally, and ultimately globally. And we'd really like to see the WTO play a greater role to bring together climate ministers, labour ministers, and obviously trade ministers for a strategic discussion on how trade can be mainstreamed within sustainability policy making, how it can make a greater contribution, and really to act as a catalyst to draw those different streams of policy making together in a way that I think makes logical sense from a business perspective.
Super, thank you so much. And that was a great call to action to WTO.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you for taking time for actually doing this keynote now while you're on your way, and good luck with the COP when you arrive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
there.
See
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. Super. So we will go into the next segment of the show. So I will start to call up the panelists who are here physically, and then we'll go on through the virtual space. So first on the show, we have our Alfa Laval speaker, Katarina Paulsson, coming up on the stage. You're head of sustainability for Alfa Laval. Welcome. And then we have my boss, Mats Pellbäck, head of sustainability at Ericsson. Super, welcome on the stage. So let's see if we maybe get some people here on the Zoom. Perfect. So we do have CEO of AFRY, Jonas Gustavsson here. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And then we have ABB's Theodor Swedjemark, who is the communication and sustainability, chief sustainability officer at ABB. Welcome.
Thank you.
Super. I think we go directly in to the questions, and we have quite a number of questions. So try to be brief and short, and we hopefully can get through them all by the session's ending. So I think I will start with you, Jonas. You know, hearing from your fellow CEO colleague Börje Ekholm and Andrew Wilson, listening to them, what is the role of innovation in your business when it comes to sustainable solution?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here. And it was great to listen to the first speakers. And I want to build on what Börje said about digital. I mean, we are a company, a service-driven company with 17,000 engineers. And traditionally, we have been implementing a lot of the products that, for example, Ericsson, ABB, or Alfa Laval have been doing. And we are doing that now. We have some really great cooperations with our colleagues. We have done business with Ericsson for more than 100 years. But what we can see also now is that digital offers a completely new arena for us. We are strong in implementing solutions and products in the industrial sector, and we are also strong in the infra world. And right now, I would say that we as a company, we are also gearing up, I would say, innovation investment into digital, because the digital arena offers unique opportunities for us as well to use these strong products we're offering that comes among others from Ericsson, for example, with 5Gs, that we can, together with our clients, find completely new way of supporting them in their business. Börje mentioned some of the plans that Ericsson have implemented with significant less energy consumption, for example. And we are doing that now. If you look on the pulp and paper industry, where we are very strong, we can do a lot of things now based on connectivity, 5G, AI models. So to use this technology platform that is existing and being close to the clients and find innovative way of using digitalization to find more sustainable solution is one of the areas that we are gearing up for a lot. So I will stay there to say that partnering up, but also using the digital space offers a completely new arena, even for companies like AFRY, who is more into the service part of the business.
I think that's so many wise words, Jonas, and I think partnership is the key here. And I think all of our companies, here on stage and virtual room, we are collaborating, and I think that's so really nice, and we are on the same path here. Theodor, are you also wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, sure. If you can, I had a little bit difficulty hearing the question originally. If you could repeat that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the question was what is the role of innovation in your business when it comes to sustainable solutions?
Okay, very good. No, I mean, also to your comment that we're all partners here. We're a close partner of AFRY for many times. We have worked also together with them, but also with Ericsson and Alfa Laval. We're very proud. They announced also yesterday they are joining something we call the energy efficiency movement, and come back to that in a minute, but it's something that we started in ABB last year because we are active in a lot of things which help drive energy efficiency. But just come into that, we are a global technology company, and innovation has always been our lifeblood since over 130 years ago, when the two predecessor company, ASEA in Sweden and BBC in Switzerland, were founded at the late 19th century, was really to take advantage of a new technology at that time, which is electricity. I think it's something we all take for granted today, but since then we have really been pushing the boundaries in the use of both electricity, but kind of neighboring technologies, electrification in general, automation, robotics, and industrial motion, which in many ways all help drive sustainable development, but also sustainable impact for our customers and for the whole value chain. So today, sustainability is really a key part of our company's purpose. And as I mentioned, what we try to do to help our customers through energy efficiency, productivity, driving circularity, like helping to cut emissions and waste throughout the whole life cycle of equipment. We've made a commitment, which we are very proud of. We want to help our customers reduce their annual CO2 emissions by at least 100 megatons in the year 2030. And to put that in perspective, that's the same as taking 30 million combustion cars off the road every year. And that's only possible through innovation. We have invested approximately 5% of our global revenues today in R&D, and a lot of that is focused, again, coming into topics such as energy process efficiency, but also helping to drive circularity. So that's super important, and it's definitely the core of what we do at ABB and have been doing for the last 100 plus years.
Thank you, Theodor. When you said, helping your customers enabling this, do you have a plan? Or you said innovation was really important, but as Börje talked about, having the milestones is also quite important. So how does it look like for you?
No, definitely. We have very concrete plans. Today we operate with 21, or actually 20, because last week we sold one division. So we have now 20 divisions. And we have, by operating division and business area, very concrete plans and how different technologies drive different impacts. We measure this and, of course, work to drive increasingly the sustainable impact from those technologies together with their customers, but also other partners such as AFRY.
Thank you so much. I will move on to quite similar questions, but maybe a bit more example-wise. How have we can start with Alfa Laval's investment into innovation resulted in groundbreaking solutions for climate?
Well, thank you very much. And I just reflected on an interesting fact that most of the companies here today are over 100 years old. Do you realize the impact that innovation has for our survival? Without innovation, we wouldn't exist, and we're 100 years old. Actually, we're 137 years old. But to your question, Alfa Laval is a global leader in technologies in separation, heat transfer, and fluid handling, and more specifically about investing. So we have recently, the past year, invested in a startup. And since it's Saturday, I thought I should take an example from the beer industry, where we have acquired a company that actually concentrates beer. So you know that beer is 98% water, and transporting water takes a lot of emissions. So by concentrating the beer, you transport less water and by default reduce the carbon impact of beer. So that's a way we've invested in a startup that actually makes a big difference for carbon emissions. Another example is an acquisition we did a few years ago, where we invested in Malta, which is together with Breakthrough Industries Ventures. And it's an investment into long duration energy storage. We have talked around here in COP a lot about renewables. That means that energy is going to become more intermittent, and being able to store that intermittent energy is of course going to become increasingly more important. So that investment is also going to make an incredible impact into the availability of renewables and the reduced intermittency of it. And finally, a joint venture 50-50 with Wallenius, where we're actually have a target, 2025, to have wind propulsion in cargo ships. And this will reduce the carbon emissions from ships by more than 90%. So those are 3 examples of investments that concretely are making a difference.
That's really good examples. I don't know, can you top that, Mats? Or?
No, for sure not. But representing a company that sort of is a 140-year-old startup and sort of have innovated and transformed itself over and over again. I mean, with digital technology, in the first digital switchboards for fixed communication, through being the first company with cellular technology, and now pioneering 5G. So I think for us, as Börje said, we are more providing the platform for innovation, right? Without 5G, we cannot have stable grids in the future. We cannot have autonomous, electrified vehicles on the streets. So I think that for us, it's really, we are developing the fundamental infrastructure for innovation, where the rest of the companies here are really, I mean, AFRY are supporting the other companies in a way to drive technology projects, and ABB and Alfa Laval are using these technologies to really take a quantum leap, I would say, on a sustainability journey, because the power of digitalization is so strong. It is the biggest driver of exponential change. And we need to use that power to really break the curve fast. So I think that is how I see it, and that's why it's so important to really invest in the infrastructure and drive that, because otherwise it's really hard to build the race car if you don't have a street. And if we don't have the 5G infrastructure, we cannot innovate. So we really need that infrastructure fast. So I think that's how we see ourselves, and of course we are innovating all the time. We are already working on 6G, and we are building that for sustainability from ground up, as we built 5G for energy efficiency. 5G is 10 times more energy efficient than 4G. So I mean, the link between energy consumption and amount of data that we are using is broken completely. So from that perspective, I think we need to really use this platform to innovate and also use the technologies that are available and scale them fast.
Thank you so much. I don't know, do Theodor or Jonas want to comment on this, or also come with your own examples?
No, I could maybe build on that, and again, then I also want to talk about the power of digitalization, and because I really believe that right now, with the tremendous challenge we have on climate, we are also in a period where digitalization as an enabler gives us an enormous opportunity to find new ways of doing things. And as it was said, we as a company, we are basically quite often in the intersection between product companies or innovative companies like ABB, Alfa Laval or Ericsson, and dealing with the clients. So if you just look on a traditional industry like pulp and paper or some of the utilities, they are still in extremely early days when it comes to really using the power of digitalization. So we're really innovative products, but also the 5G enabler, we see enormous opportunities to take some big steps in becoming more sustainable in that business. And if you scale that up, that business is completely new. So digitalization for AFRY as a service company, because we started with steam boilers 125 years back, and obviously that's not the most innovative product right now. So of course we have innovated ourselves over the years, and we also have sustainability as a mission. But the cool thing with digital platform is that we as a service company also need to start to use our client interfaces, the knowledge we have, the partners we have, and finding new use cases to speed up innovation into more sustainable solutions. And I want to raise one more thing, is that we are strong in the industry. We have some great partners. Where I think we can innovate more is in the traditional infrastructure segment that are sometimes way behind some of the industry verticals. So that's where because we also have a big business into the infrastructure world, and there we think we can do much more. But I am very hopeful because I think there are so many fantastic technology platforms, as also Börje said. Now it's more about, in a fast forward pace, finding use cases together with the clients and implement them. And there's a strong willingness. I mean, we have a lot of projects in South America in pulp and paper. Many of our clients are extremely willing to find, sustainable new business models or implement the next level of technology. So I think in a way I'm very hopeful, but of course we need to increase the pace.
Super, thank you so much, Jonas. I don't know, Theodor, do you also want to comment?
Yeah, maybe I can also just walk through a couple of examples. I mean, there was mentioned several times, I think, Mats, you said 5G will help enable autonomous and electrified cars. You see I have behind me here an ABB Formula E race car, chose to put it, but just one very, very good example of where taking, foresight, but also investing in something which really helps now drive sustainability is more than 10 years ago, when nobody was really thinking about e-mobility in that sense. We took the decision to invest in a small startup in the Netherlands who had the great idea at that time to use direct current, which is something ABB has been working on in energy transmission for a long, long time, but to use it in terms of charging an electric car, because you could cut the time to do that very shortly. And we were more or less alone in our field to go that direction at that point in time, which means today we are a global leader in EV charging. And we've actually sold almost 500,000 of these high power fast chargers in more than 88 countries today. And just earlier this year, at the end of September, we launched the world's fastest EV charger, which is now the latest iteration. It's called Terra 360. And it can add, if your car is able to handle it, up to 100 kilometers of range in less than 3 minutes, or fully charging an EV car in less than 15 minutes. And I think this is a good talk about a better case of innovation. And of course, with that in mind, you have the cars, you have the charger, and then with the 5G technology that Mats talked about here, you can also hopefully drive the next level of it with autonomous, where you can have more fleets automatically driving around on the streets. But there are many also other examples. We are pushing the boundaries, for example, in electrifying the mining space. We also recently launched some new solutions in that area. Mining operations around the world account for approximately 7% of global emissions. And if you can electrify a single 100-ton mining truck, you can, by single truck, you can reduce more than 1,000 tons of CO2 emissions per year. So if you talk about value change, but you have e-mobility, you will need a lot of mined material to build these batteries and other things, and the whole infrastructure in and around that. We're also really holistically looking at innovating throughout the whole value chain to drive that.
Thank you so much, Theodor. And I think what you took up here with the EVs charging, then you need the infrastructure and you also need the political will to make this happen. In terms of the official stakeholders or policymaker, do we need to collaborate more with them, or are we doing enough? Or what is your strategy here? I don't know. I throw it out to everyone. So the first curveball.
Well, maybe I can start. Actually, ABB and Alfa Laval in Stockholm on October 8th had a high-level meeting together with policymakers to discuss energy efficiency. And I think one of the key issues here on getting policymakers on board is actually to congregate around one issue and one challenge that we are to solve together. And I think that's part of what COP is about, that we agree on the problem, then we have a different pathway to reach it. But just congregating around one issue and trying to get our feet around what are the roles of the different players is very important. So I would suggest that more policymakers try to make space for this type of collaboration, because I really think it both gives an insight into the different parts of the stakeholders, but also what responsibility each stakeholder needs to take. So that's one example that I think shows a little bit about the coming together around one issue makes a difference.
Well, if I may continue, I think we just came from the EU pavilion, and there was a discussion on the Green Deal and on the taxonomy work that is ongoing. And I think that the whole taxonomy, but also the NDCs, miss out on digitalization, because there is such a focus on improvement on the existing and within the existing silos. So you miss out. So in fact, if you improve one petrol-driven car a little bit, that is sort of an improvement counted by the taxonomy, and move that into a bio-driven car instead. That's improvements according to the taxonomy. But if you take the whole car away through a digitalization solution, that's not counted. So sort of we miss out on the big leaps while we sort of are taking the small steps and count them as big. So I think there is a big discretion around how we include digitalization and true innovation into both the NDCs as well as into, for instance, the taxonomy and how we measure digitalization. I think that is a big problem from an innovation and transformation perspective, not to sort of take a little more holistic approach and start, instead of starting with sort of a truck, start with what is the truck used for? How do we sort of minimize the impact of the solution in the end? That would be a much better approach, I think. More difficult for sure, but I think that would be more driving innovation through the whole work and workspace. And I think that is something that we can hand over to the political side when they measure the impacts.
Super, thank you so much, Mats. But I'm also, to you, Jonas, you know, how do you interact with to create those projects that usually comes to you via your customers? Can you influence them to actually create those projects that is needed, and we were talking about here today?
I would say more and more. If I go back, I've been 20 years in the manufacturing industry, working for some of the, even ABB way back. But I would say that in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been more dialogues with clients about finding those new way of doing things. There was a period a bit more of the same. I think the last years now, starting, for example, with automotive industry, going from 120 years based on combustion engines and going more towards electrification with new business model, digital ways of doing things, transport as a service. And that starts now to be spread into the municipalities, for example, that starts to realize that we need to integrate the verticals into the overall infrastructure. So transporting goods into a city is not only 2 different verticals, it's a part of a bigger ecosystem. It's still early days, but I would say we as an integration company in many ways, we have an increased responsibility to partner up and find new ways of doing things. And I think Sweden is a fantastic platform because we have a long tradition of doing that in a partnership. We are working with ABB, we are working with Ericsson, and we are working with Alfa Laval to find new innovative way of implementing product solutions together with the clients in a more innovative way. And the question is then how we can scale it up further then. So yes, there is right now an increased willingness of finding new innovative way of doing things, as we also need to use in our company together with our partners.
Super, thank you so much, Jonas. And Theodor, you know, I know your colleague here, and he talks a lot about policy, so I guess you have quite a lot to say.
I assume you're referring to Jacob.
Yeah.
Very good. No, he's passionate about that. But maybe I just quickly again go back to what you started with e-mobility and collaboration. I quickly go back to again the Formula E picture behind me. This is also one of the reasons why we chose a few years ago to become the title partner of a global race series, which is it's focused, of course, then on electric mobility. It's the only FIA World Championship single-seater electric class, and it has a few concepts to it. The races are taking place downtown in cities rather on racetracks outside the cities, because we want to showcase the excitement to everyone, including public stakeholders, about the power of e-mobility and how powerful it can be in many dimensions. And we try, when these races next year, hopefully there will be 16 different races in and around the world on all continents. We try to engage also both with the ecosystem of partners within the ABB Formula E World Championship, where you have a lot of car OEMs, you have people like DHL, you have all kinds of different stakeholders, but also then with the public stakeholders. So for example, last year we were in New York for the E-Prix. We had the Secretary of Energy coming to participate in a discussion together with many other different, like the City of New York, etc., just to sit down and have those discussions. And then we see very concrete actions coming out of that later. So it's just one example on how we engage. But another example, also Sweden Linked, is the CEO Alliance to Support the Green Deal, where my CEO, Björn Rosengren, is a member. And he, together with Christian, who's the CEO of Scania, are jointly driving a project forward to try to electrify heavy trucking in Europe, and working very closely then with the EU commissioners on that. So I think there are many different opportunities. Again, ICC, Andrew was here. It's another one there. Also Jacob, to mention him again, is a very big player in terms of working with them, and then WTO to drive really these type of things. So standards in technology, it's also super important in that context.
Super. And do you feel that you have been able to influence them in the direction you want?
Definitely,
yeah.
Definitely. And I would say there are big differences depending on where in the world you go. For example, in China, they are very far ahead when it comes to adopting EV technology. And they make these decisions very fast. And when they make the decisions, the implementation goes very fast. And in some other parts of the world, the discussion takes a bit longer. But I would say there are big regional differences in how this is proceeding. But at the moment, we see positive, really positive momentum, I would say, more or less across the whole, at least developed world in this area.
Yeah. Super. Thank you so much, Theodor. So, do we see any more, gaps in this? Do you want to fill in something more we see that we can do better?
Well, I can we did a market research in Sweden with 50 large companies that represent about 50% of the economy in Sweden, where we asked several questions around climate, amongst others. And one of the answers was that to accelerate the rate at which research becomes implemented is paramount to bridging the gap to accelerate the transition, right? But talking about what should be done, I would like to reiterate what Andrew was talking about, the small and medium-sized enterprises. Very often in this new transition, it's small companies that have the idea on how to leapfrog, like what Mats was talking about, going from what we're used to something completely different. But that's a risk. So we really need to mobilize financial resources to incentivize first movers. And I think that's critical to advance the rate at which we implement new solutions. So that's a bit of what I think about this topic, about bridging the gap, that it's to mobilize and let first movers feel that they are not taking the full risk themselves, because often that's a small company.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think maybe Mats have something on that. We work quite a lot with SMEs.
Yeah, I mean, we are one of the founders of the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders, which is a toolbox for small and medium-sized enterprises. Because when we launched our report demonstrating how digitalization can drive change in society, and the numbers Börje was talking about, the research for that, we realized that we were here, the same companies over and over again. But that was 10% of the global companies. The other 90% were not doing anything, and we wanted to sort of push something. But we realized that it's really hard to push a chain, right? I mean, if you push a chain, nothing happens. You can pull a chain. So then we went upstream in our value chain, and we can pull our suppliers with us. And we have 24,000 suppliers. And a large part of our emissions comes from a few suppliers, but we need all these 24,000 suppliers, all small and medium-sized companies globally, to start working on this. So providing a toolbox and a way of driving things was really something that we realized we have to do. And then we joined up with some of our customers, and we joined up with big companies like Unilever, IKEA, and Microsoft have now joined, and Tech Mahindra from India. So it's not only a Swedish thing, it's really a global thing. So 1.5 degree supply chain leaders. And it's also a difference because we have sort of signed up to all of these pledges over and over again. Nobody have ever come and asked us, what did you do afterwards? I mean, you sign these things, but nobody asks you. But what the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders is really about is action. So we are not asking you to sign anything. We are just saying, this is a qualification. You have to qualify to be part of this. And you have to qualify by setting 1.5 degree targets. You have to qualify by reporting on your targets publicly all the time. And if you do that and push this forward in your own supply chain, then you qualify and then you're part of it. And that really drives action. So it's much more action oriented than signing up or writing a pledge. We have seen so many pledges, but driving action is much more difficult. And I think that is really something that we are passionate about, securing that we can get the action going and also spreading this to a much wider audience. So I really encourage all of you to, if you haven't join the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders. You have to qualify, so you have to have 1.5 degree targets yourself. You have to report publicly, but if you do that, then you're in. Doesn't cost anything, then it's just to go and you can have all the toolbox, the SME Climate Hub from the ICC, training, ways of driving your supply chain, all of that is available online. You can use the toolbox even if you're not sort of a partner or a member, because that is for free, that's for everyone. So I think that is another part that is important for small and medium-sized companies is really that they have a hard time to understand that. And in the science-based target, we talk a lot about value chain. To understand your complete value chain is extremely complex and difficult for small companies to do. But if you can focus on your scope 1 and 2 to start with, and if everybody do that across the value chain, I mean, my scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1 and 2. Of course, we can solve it by just spreading that fast enough, I think. So for us, the simplicity and the action driving is really, really important on that topic and to fill that gap, I think.
Yeah. And we have so many more plans for the SME Climate Hub to increase the tools, and especially also when you look at finance, as you said, Katarina, really realizing that. And I think they have some new exciting projects there, hopefully soon coming. And off to the virtual world, do any of you want to talk about gaps needed to be filled? No, you have the solutions, it's perfect.
But can I just add to what Mats was saying? I think here digitalization actually also plays an incredible important role, because as us that are professionals in the sustainability arena know, transparency of data is going to be essential to be able to both measure scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions, and to know that what you're measuring is actually being done. So here I just want to reiterate what Börje started with, that digitalization is vital to our continued transparency. And I just want to add that because that's also an important part of the SME Hub, to be able to count your emissions and to not double account as well.
Yeah, and it needs to be easier for them, otherwise it will not happen. They need to get the support they need because, they don't have big boards, they don't have the resources that Börje has, even though we don't have too much, right? We can always get more, Mats. So I think we need to help them, and we can do that together. So I think I will take the final questions from my one. So today is the nature team at COP26, and I know maybe, we are quite many tech companies, but I think we do have maybe some potential to also help nature-based solutions and other parts of that industry. So how do your company relate to that? And I know maybe Katarina can start with that.
Well, I just wanted to take one example. Of course, there's several examples, but one of the ones I wanted to lift today at COP is, when ships transport goods, they have ballast water. In that ballast water, invasive species travel. So we need to make sure that these invasive species do not invade other ecosystems. We have an innovative technology that uses UV and filtration to hinder these invasive species from traveling in the ballast water. And that is an innovation called Pure Ballast. And why I wanted to lift it today is because it tangents a bit of what we've been talking about here. part of it is that the technology is a result of a partnership with Wallenius once again, where we built this technology based on our strengths and built a partnership that resulted in this technology. But the other is that this technology would not have made it into the market if it wasn't accelerated by regulation. So I think that binds together very many of the themes we've been talking about here at COP, about partnerships, about nature, the relation of nature to climate actually, and also the importance of driving by governments. Not necessarily by regulation, by a palette of different approaches to make sure that we rapidly implement technology that makes true difference.
And it can. I don't know, who else want to take a stab?
Well, I can only comment on the fact that, of course, AFRY and what we have been working with, I would say, biodiversity for a long time, but I think we are now taking the next step also in that, because, for example, the forest industry is a segment that we are gearing up for, and connecting it back to digitalization, one of the themes that we are pushing is to using digital twins and drone technology and AI for enabling much more, I would say, control and understanding the forest segment when it comes to biodiversity. A super exciting way of thinking. That is one example where we are pushing it and getting the biodiversity up on a higher part of the agenda in those segments.
Okay, so maybe you want to take for the audience what is a digital twin. It's maybe not always well known.
And I know Börje, you use it, and it is a thing that we will hear more and more about, and you use it in so many ways. But it's basically a digital replica of the real world, and you can use it for so many things, and there's so many ways of doing it. And you can actually make a digital twin as big as you want, and then you can simulate and you can understand and you can use it in many ways. We have digital twin that is a digital build-up, and then we connect it to the real world. So the digital twin will become more and more similar to the real world. And when you put in AI into that digital twin, cool things will happen. So we will use that digital twin concept, and it is used now cross-value chain in verticals. And one example is that you use drone technology, AI, and a lot of data to create digital twins of big forest land and implement biodiversity technology data into that. And then you can do a lot of things, monitor a lot of things that you could never do in the past. So digital twin is a term that will use more and more, and it is used more and more. Yeah. And it's enabled, among others, from 5G and the connectivity.
Super. Thank you so much, Jonas. I think that was a really good description, and I think, as you say, we will hear more and more about this. Maybe Mats, I know that we have something more on nature and technology.
Yeah, two things I can talk about. One is really to utilize, and this is more on to demonstrate how technology can improve things. Mangroves are extremely important for the climate, and mangroves has been under threat. So planting mangroves is a big thing, but often these plants die. So there has been a very poor utilization of that, and we had a project that we started in Malaysia, and then it was replicated in the Philippines, and now are moving over to the Arab world and to Africa, and that's really connected mangroves. So we connect the mangroves, and what we look at is the salinity of the water, the drought, pH, and several other parameters on there, and by that we have increased the survival rate with over 60% of the saplings. So that is a huge improvement utilizing digital technology, but also making it to a local community that gets those information and can go out and take the action and get paid for that. So I think that is one part. The other part, I think, is really about leaving no bind behind. I think it's hugely important. If now 5G and these technologies are so important for us to solve the climate, we need to build that, not only in the Western Europe, we are behind, but I think also in Africa, in Latin America and other places, very, very fast. And it's an extremely efficient technology. So really supporting that build out for this to become a global thing, I think, is hugely important. And you heard AFRY talk about the forestry. Then we don't need to cover people, then we need to cover surface. We need to cover the forest, the farmland, and everything else with digital technology. And there are solutions. 5G is more efficient in covering surface as well. And then you can do precision farming. And the last thing I think about digitalization, and that is often forgotten. If you remember, I started talking a little bit about music industry and sort of how 4G was a platform for innovation, or maybe Börje did that. And if you think about it, before digitalization of music industry, there were 5 global companies deciding what music you should listen to, more or less. Now everybody can afford their studio. Digitalization is a democracy driver. It is a small-scale driver. Suddenly, smallhold farmers can afford to do something that they couldn't afford before, because investment in agriculture equipment is huge tractors, huge equipment. But with the digital equipment, you can go small. And then a big farm will have many autonomous vehicles, but the small farm can have few. So I think that will drive democracy and access to markets in a totally different way. So I think the sort of small scale opportunities and level of economic impact is huge with this. So I think those are often forgotten, those benefits of digitalization. So I really think that is important for us to leave no one behind and secure that we invest globally on these technologies.
Thank you so much, Mats. The session is going towards an end, so I would actually want to have Theodor to maybe, could you help me with some final call to action? What is your main key takeaways from this session, and what should we do until next year when we meet at COP again?
Well, I'm going to try to keep it short then if we're coming to an end. For me, the whole session is about technology and innovation, and in our belief, this is the majority of the answer to the solution. Börje said it many times, or several times in his introductory remarks. Most of the technology, we believe almost all of it, that is needed to solve the climate crisis is available already today. So it's about implementing it, using it more, collaborating more, driving that, whether it's in terms of technical standardization, trade collaboration, further innovation in and around those platforms. So I would just say we need to keep going what we have already started now as a global community and society, and really have the courage to take the bold steps that are needed to make sure that our world remains what it should be for future generations.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And with that, I think we will say that the session is over. Thank you so much for coming, you all there, and also listening virtually. Thank you so much.